And it's really not about them. It's about one gentleman who's turning 90 years old and another gentleman who's turning 5 years old on the exact same day. 85 years separates these two, and I can't tell the difference between the ages. You're looking young. But Don Felipe and I have had many a conversation. Put it in perspective for a moment. In 1964, what were you doing?
I started teaching at New Mexico State University.
And that's the year I was born. Just to kind of put it in perspective, for those of you who were born in '64, I know there's one other person in here who's born the same as you. I'm not going to point her out. But that kind of puts it in perspective. And in fact, Jay, what year were you born?
78.
78. What were you doing in 1978?
1978, I joined the faculty of Texas Women's University as director of the Institute for Intercultural Studies.
Okay. So that's what he's doing. What year were you born, can I ask?
1943.
What were you doing in 1943?
1943, I joined the Marines.
When you start to put it in terms of generations like that, 90 years is a long time. No offense, I hope I don't make it.
You'll miss the best part.
I'll probably miss the best part, but we're hoping for another 90. We know that's not possible. So in the meantime, we're going to celebrate what you have here amongst all of our friends. And I know I myself just have treasured you since the first day I saw you in the GRC when I was interviewing. Don Felipe was sitting in the front row. I've told the story before. He absolutely wanted a Hispanic to be the next president. You can see how that worked out for him. And so he asked each of the candidates about where they were born and where they grew up, I think is what you asked. And he asked it in Spanish. Of course, I answered in Spanish, then we moved on with the rest of the interview. Because throughout his life, he's been very passionate about civil liberties, and particularly it deals with Chicanos and Chicanas. He has been in sit-ins on president's offices. He's been part of movements that have transformed communities and higher education. He really became the first Hispanic president, first Chicano, to serve as president, if it hadn't been for some unfortunate luck that forced him out of that opportunity. But the point here is that he has been monumental, not only in just his history as a person, but his history in terms of civil rights and the civil movement. He obviously was showing leadership at a very critical time in the history of our country. Many things came about to protect the freedom of the academy, tenure being one of them, in terms of just what was happening as administration would get rid of anybody who was a rebel rouser. So for those of you who oftentimes wonder why do we have tenure, it really stems back to the time that he was champion. If you go back and take a look at what was going on during that time frame. Additionally, the country, of course, that he fought for, World War II, came out of World War II, obviously went into the Korean conflict, Vietnam, all those pieces were all part of that. Served his country, made it possible for him to have sit-ins, made it possible for him to tell an administrator that that president was full of garbage. He didn't tell me that. Made it possible for us to be here and enjoy the way of life that we have now. And so, from me and from all of us, I'd just like to say to you, Feliz cumpleaños.
Gracias.
Because I was president, I got to go first. I don't know if any of the rest of you would like to say anything to Don Felipe. And you'll notice I use, for those of you who are more anglicized than most, Don and Doña are two formal titles that are used to show reverence, respect. They're typically earned, sometimes not, typically earned, and in this case, rightfully so. So that's why I call him Don Felipe. It's not the fact that his first name really is Don.
My advisors on my dissertation thought that was the case. My advisors thought every time I used Don in my dissertation, they thought that was this person's first name.
Yeah, it's a title. It's a very important title. Anybody else would like to say something?
Allow me to get it over with.
Get it over.
There are very few Republicans that I like. I happen to love this one and this one who worked for Reagan. So, Okay, that's the way it goes. Back in the mid to late 80s, I was teaching at a community college in Northern California, and I used to show this movie. It's a classic from a classic book, from a classic guy. North from Mexico is called. It's maybe one of the first major immigration studies / Chicano studies written by a non-Chicano. And he just happened to work, I didn't know that. He was also at the time editor of The Nation magazine in those days. But I used to show that movie, and I used to hear this voice, the narrator. And I knew from the credits who he was, and I read some stuff by this guy who changed from Philip to Felipe, you know, and that kind of stuff. And then before I came to Western, I also read another piece in one of the major Chicano academic journals. It's called Aztlán. And you know, I read it, enjoyed it. He was talking about another great writer that ended up, after his retirement, ended up teaching at UC Santa Barbara, who I had met before in Mexico, thanks to another friend, Edward Simmons, who passed away a couple of years ago, who I didn't know knew Don Felipe, who was the organizer of the first Chicano conclave of literature in South Texas. And out of there came a book that I didn't know he had written. So I have known Don Felipe before I had met him in person. When he came to Western with Gilda, I knew that they were coming because another friend told me they were coming to Western. And certainly since that day, we have developed, I suppose, a great friendship. You know, we do a lot of things together, believe it or not. And so I'm just, there's a lot of things that I can say about him and on all his work and the people that I know that know him from many walks of life. People at ASU from the Leadership Institute that I know very well, who are very well aware of what Don Felipe did as one of the creators of the Leadership Institute at ASU, just to name a few things that have come across in my wanderings that Don Felipe's print has been left as he goes on. So I call him tenderly El Chamaco. Not to be confused with El Chamuco. The Chamuco is the devil. El Chamaco is just the young kid, all right? And so, felicidades, congratulations en el 90. Un placer.
Le agradezco mucho.
And I always call him Don Felipe.
Thank you.
Anybody else? You won't remember. You can see following up with Magdalena, when I first came 3 years ago, obviously met Don Felipe, and I needed educating, and he was happy to do so. So I said, he gave me some books. One was We Are Chicanos. So I began to learn. And since he and I both are poets, we had that connection as well. And even though I was not totally aware of the background when I came, I am now, as Magdalena said, very much aware, respect, and in awe of, actually, the vitae that he has achieved and accomplished. And I'll end with just one example. You know, all of us coming up through the academy, although we don't do it so much here, in the major research institutions, part of
getting tenure is your research and your publication history. And oftentimes you are gauged by how many times footnotes use you as a reference. And they're called seminal essays. So, if you've written a seminal essay, it means that you really broke new ground in a field, and that from then on, every paper, every book is going to reference your essay that you did. And that is the case with Don Felipe. And for example, I was just reading the collection of Juan Felipe Herrera, who is now poet laureate of the U.S., and I guess would be considered one of the, if not the leading Chicano writer going today. And in fact, we may be having him here in November, which is going to be fantastic. But the introduction to Herrera's work was a very scholarly look at Herrera's poetry, and it's a wide-ranging plays, poetry. It's a stew of language. It's an unbelievable use of language. But in that introduction, there is the reference to the Chicano Renaissance, and so that's part of the legacy that we have here.
You know, Dr. Crocker, statistically, I was just kind of looking at the audience, and those of you who are getting up there in age and have surpassed so many others in this life seem to have younger wives. I don't know if it's just watching this a little bit.
I think it has to do with poetry, doesn't it?
It has to do with poetry also. Would anybody else like to say a few words before we go to the cake?
Maybe Gilda.
Gilda?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and spending some time with this milestone event for obviously someone who's very special to me. And just as a little quick thing, born and raised in El Paso, he was the first director of Chicano Studies in El Paso. We did not meet then. We met many, many, many years later in the in the library. The punchline is?
That was the name of the bar.
We met decades later at the University of Texas Library where he was doing research. But I knew who he was because I was a good librarian. I knew my literature. And what attracted me most to him was what I call his dancing eyes. They were just so full of life. And he danced his way into my heart. And we'll be married 30 years this December, so it's been a good journey. So thank you for being part of this. And I guess, shall we eat cake?
Before you eat cake, I got to tell you a story about Gilda and Don Felipe. They're getting up there in years and they're thinking that they're having memory problems. And so they went to the doctor, and the doctor says, it's just very common. What you need to do is when you get home, just write everything down. That way you'll remember. So they get home and they're watching television, and Felipe gets up and he says, I want to go get some ice cream. And Gilda says, well, by the time you get to the kitchen, you might have forgotten it. You better write it down. He says, come on, I'm only going to the kitchen. I can get ice cream. On his way there, Gilda says, hey, would you mind getting me some ice cream and putting some whipped cream on top of it? And Felipe says, not a problem. Whipped cream, ice cream, be happy to do it. Gilda says, you better write it down. We just went to the doctor. That's what he said. Felipe says, my memory's good. I can remember this. Oh, and put a cherry on top, says Gilda. Not a problem. Cherry on top of the whipped cream, on top of the ice cream. I'll be happy to do it. You better write it down. Come on, everybody knows the cherry goes on top of whipped cream on top of ice cream. So into the kitchen he goes. About 45 minutes later, he comes back out. And he hands Gilda a plate, and Gilda says, eggs and bacon? I told you you're going to forget the hash browns. Well, we have some cake.
Livingston.